Okay, so we will once again begin as we always do with a short meditation. So please relax in your chair and close your eyes. And take in a deep breath through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. And inhale through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. And as you go at your own pace of inhaling through the nose and holding, and exhaling through the mouth and holding. If thoughts should come into your head, just observe them and let them pass, like watching a car move past on the road. Now is not the time for solving problems. All you need to do is inhale through the nose and hold, and exhale through the mouth and hold. And on your next inhale, say to yourself, Shema. And on the exhale, listen. Shema, listen. In Shema, we're listening deeply, without judgment, without offering advice. In Shema, we are listening with an open heart. Shema, listen. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes. Well, that meditation is a reminder of some of the ground rules or the requests, I guess, as being part of the Mussar group, which is, we are here to kind of be on a journey together. We try not to judge other people for their journey. We try not to judge ourselves if we feel like somehow our own journey is not measuring up, or we should not be doing what we think we should be doing. We also don't offer each other advice. We're not here to kind of fix each other or anything like that, but, we're here to share space and share an experience and provide us an opportunity to look within and see how we might grow and change. So a reminder for those of you who may be new to Mussar practice, and if you're not new, it's always helpful for all of us to get a reminder. Mussar practice has kind of three phases. There's a mantra, a recitation phrase that we say in the morning to frame the day. We'll look at one soul trait at a time. And so we pick our recitation phrase to match that soul trait. We're beginning with humility. We'll look at that mantra in just a second. So then it's about acting. It's picking one small thing you can do to move towards balance. So if we're working on humility, and you find out that maybe you don't speak up as much because you're feeling a little unsure of yourself, it might be I'm going to speak up more in some situation, to try to grow and move out of my comfort zone. I've italicized one small thing because we're going to look at a reading. This is kind of the classic or the way that Mussar is generally taught and practiced, but we're going to be looking at a different approach about taking really big sort of dramatic actions, which isn't what I usually recommend, but I thought it was interesting. And then the third is to journal. And my journaling practice has picked up a bit. I don't journal as much as I used to. Many people don't journal. But it is, when I do journal, it really does help because it helps ingrain the practice. It helps ingrain kind of the awareness about where was my humility challenge today and how did I answer that challenge? Did I do okay? Did I not do okay? It's really just a way of kind of keeping track and measuring. And it's not for anyone but you. You will not need to send your journal entries to me or anyone else. I will not be correcting them. There will be no grades. This is your own spiritual curriculum to do with as you wish. So the mantra for humility, or the recitation phrase, there's of course many possible, but one that I really like that many people resonate is no more than my space, not less than my place. This was written by Alan Maimonides in his book, Everyday Holiness. I'm going to stop sharing, and then I will actually share this in the chat. And so I want to open it up for conversation. What is that? How does that speak to you? What might that mean in your life? Oops, all right, I didn't copy. I'm just going to type it. Who would like to begin? Sue.
So 2 things about that is it's interesting because I write my statements. I have statements that I write when I first started Mussar a long time ago. And it's interesting that I write the one for humility. I have 2 statements. I say no more than my place, no less than my space, but on 2 separate lines, which is kind of interesting because I didn't realize it was 1 sentence. So I'm taking up 2 lines, which is more than my space, but that's okay. So that was my first comment, but I think it's so important, right? And then now I'm thinking more about, it's interesting that I spoke up first because I'm thinking more about speaking up in the sense of when do I speak and when do I remain quiet and how difficult that is. And also the balance of listening and listening to others. And I think sometimes now I feel very comfortable. Obviously, I spoke up right away, but I think that's a challenge when sometimes I'll think of something I want to say and I get very nervous and I don't want to say it out loud. And then I don't say it. And then I feel bad that I didn't say it. So that's a challenge. Those are my comments.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think you point out something which I wasn't explicit about, which is really important, is to write down the mantra or write down the recitation phrase on an index card or on a sticky note, and then put it on, your bedside or on your mirror in the bathroom or just someplace where you'll see it, kind of as a reminder during the day. Paul, hi, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to everybody. Good to see everybody back. It's really nice. So I have a new job, as many of you know from before the holidays, and so that's been going well. I think my biggest challenge is with being with new people, sort of establishing what is my role, what is my place, so this humility is just right smack dab in middle of what I'm doing on a daily basis right now, at work anyway. And it's it's uncomfortable because I felt like I had found my place and my space in my previous job, just thinking about work. And I knew what my role was. I felt very comfortable in that. So now I'm supposed to be doing basically the same thing in a new environment. And I've got a colleague who is a lot like, it's like having a puppy around. Gets very excited about things, just cannot contain his excitement about things, and just starts ideating all over the place. And I feel like I'm overwhelmed, and like, he knows a lot about the company. I know a lot from experience. I'm older than he is and all that. But finding a way of having a conversation where I don't feel like I'm taking the rolled up newspaper and tapping him on the nose saying, I mean, it's all virtual, right? I'm not near him, so I'm not actually going to be doing that. But, just sort of, how do I engage? And finally, just the other day, I was leading a meeting, and as I knew he would, he wanted to, like, he had lots of ideas, and I didn't really speak over him, but I made sure that if we both spoke at the same time, that I persisted. And I thought that was appropriate because I was leading the meeting and I wasn't trying to drown him out. He certainly, when he had something to say and he had a spot and a space to say it, that'd be fine. So it feels like we're establishing over time some better boundaries, but just between the two of us. So this is a really good soul trait, and thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Paul. Establishing better boundaries, between the two of us. So much about Mussar is about relationality, relationships with other people. Rabbi Aristotle calls it learning to bear the burden of the other person. So, bearing the burden of the puppy that really, is jumping around a lot. That's, without swatting them on the nose. I kind of feel, by the way, that like if you had a newspaper swatting emoji or something, that might be kind of good opportunity for someone who's tech savvy. But learning the way to set that boundary. I love that example. Thank you. Hey, Joanne, great to see you.
Yes, you too. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
So I was just thinking, because the last time I ran the sisterhood meeting a couple of weeks ago, that I'm trying, and we had discussed it in the meeting, that we're not going to interrupt each other and wait to be called on. So it was so funny. One of the women, Constance, kept forgetting that she's supposed to be called on and correcting herself. But I think it went better. But I also had at one point there's this woman. I mean, she's like 91 years old, but she always interrupts and brings up a different topic or jumps to it. So I said, Bruce, we're discussing this right now. Okay, well, we'll come back and So I felt better about leading the meeting. That's all. And so because that is my place to run the meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's a really good example. It reminds me, last night I've started a new I'm facilitating a men's grief group, and we have these agreements about not interrupting and not about giving advice. And I was so busy kind of listening to people very intently on Zoom that some guy jumped in and started interrupting, and I was totally not prepared to kind of facilitate that. So I actually talked with my supervisor about that today, and it's sort of a juggling of very different than here. We got to watch the whole group, and so it's these are skills which we're always working on. We're always going to be challenged by them, and I'm happy that you felt good about the way that that challenge was dealt with. Anyone else care to share or comment? All right, so let's take this a level deeper. Now, this diagram will be familiar to some of you, to many of you perhaps. It's for each of the soul traits. I like to view them, and I create them in these spectrum diagrams, where we have these double-sided arrows, and if we have too little of a soul trait or too much of a soul trait, we run into issues. Like too little humility can lead to arrogance, but too much humility can lead to being self-debasing or not kind of occupying the space. Like in Joanne's example, she's like, okay, I'm leading the meeting. It's appropriate for me to occupy a little bit more space. Maybe last night I didn't occupy quite enough space in terms of facilitating the interruption. Would someone like to unmute and just read this quote from Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt at the bottom?
I'll read. Bob.
Great. Thanks, Bob.
Holding oneself back in order to please others, or in order not to risk offending others, which is a variation on the same theme, isn't humility. It's taking up less than my space, and that's not a character strength, it's a character flaw. Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to stop sharing here. And so what is Rabbi Barenblatt's point here? And do you need me to copy her quote into the chat? Would that be helpful? Okay. So it's either Frank or Linda.
Yeah, it's a little bit tricky there. Because I feel I need to watch myself. Because I have an opinion about everything. But if I don't share my opinion, then that's a flaw. Because an opinion enriches the conversation. Each time one of us shares something, we have a new lens to look at what we're talking about. And so this teaching, it really highlights that.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And I think that's Frank, that's a good general rule, about, hey, opinions enrich the conversation. Thank you. Sue.
I think it actually depends, because where it says holding oneself back in order to please others or in order to not risk offending, I think it's like when you speak, it's important not to offend somebody. So I think it's not necessarily, I think there's a balance, like we've talked about in Mussar, that you can offend. And I like the term wait. Why am I talking? So if you wait a minute and realize, before you, because you could actually take up, if you offend somebody, that's not good. So I think it depends. Of course, pleasing others, you don't want to just say something to please somebody, and that's not good. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Sue. Janos.
Well, it reminds me of my growth and learning that I'm together with my wife 44 years, and at the beginning, closer to the marriage and all along, I was a pleaser. I wanted to make her happy by being too humble. Now, as I'm growing, I'm becoming more speaking up. She's watching me, why are you so rude? So it's very difficult to find that middle way, how to say it in a way that I'm not too passive, because if I'm too passive, she feels, oh, you're a weak man, you are so bad, I don't like that. But when I'm speaking up, you are arrogant, you are things. So that's my part now, finding the right way where to be.
Thank you, Janos. Not easy. Marianne, hi, nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see you. Yeah, so I'm a caretaker right now for my parents, and one of my parents, I know I'm more towards the too humble side, but I think if I try to, I've been experimenting and take up my appropriate space, things just escalate.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I think there are times when it's better to just give in and realize your boundaries aren't going to be respected. Because the other way just hasn't worked. So I'd be interested to know if anybody else experienced anything like that.
Does anyone have a comment on Marianne's question?
Mm.
You know, I think with all of these things, it really depends on the situation. And, you know, it totally makes sense. You know, hey, if someone's, you know, if there's, especially with your parents, there's a power dynamic, there's an age difference, there's a lot going in there. And so figuring out like that kind of right time and place to set boundaries, that's not like a cookie cutter sort of thing. Yeah. And there's more than one soul trait that we're practicing at once. You know, maybe you're honoring your parents by just saying, you know what, you know, let them do their thing, whatever. Hard to know. Is this Linda this time, or is it Frank again? Yes, Linda.
I'll add another dimension in that introverts generally struggle with speaking out, speaking up. And I think it's a long-term issue that we each have to figure out for ourselves. And it's easy to make excuses, but you also have to live with yourself. So it's one that I think about a lot. And also I'm finding that when I push my own boundary, I don't listen as well when I talk. So I haven't figured that out.
Yeah. Thank you, Linda.
Mm.
Joanne. Looks like you're still mute.
When I first heard No More Than My Space, No Less Than My Place, my son was living with me, and I'm thinking, like, he takes over everything, you know, the house and noise and this. And he's been out, you know, he moved out over a year ago. And so when he was here last, I guess it was a little late, and I saw that his lights were off, but I said, there's dishes in the sink. I just, you know, he was like, you have to do that right now. And I said, I do, because I can't come into the kitchen in the morning with these in the sink. Sorry. So he's a little more assertive there.
Yeah.
And he lived with it, you know. It was a few more minutes and then I left.
Yeah. Thank you, Joanne.
You're welcome.
Okay, Marjorie, and then Bonnie, and then I think we're gonna push on.
Okay. I'm reading this, and for me, I think it's been mentioned earlier that this trait does kind of ebb and flow. And for me, sometimes I just have to like bite the bullet and take up less than my space. And even if I don't want to, I have to be okay with that. And I'm sure there's another midah that comes in there, but sometimes I find it's advantageous to just practice humility and not like, so what if I don't say what I really think, or I don't want to offend somebody. And it's kind of like my quote, not my circus, not my monkeys. So, if something is just like, I don't think it's a character flaw for me if I can learn to just like, okay, so I didn't say what I thought, so you're being, a monkey. It's not my problem. So for me, that's a strength.
Thank you.
That is all.
I think that's a great pushback to kind of this generalization that it's a character flaw. I mean, especially when you take a mindful approach, it's not a knee jerk. I I want everyone to like me, so I'm just gonna say what they're saying. Or I'm just gonna butter them up. But it's really different when it's like, you know what, do I really want to get into it with this person, with my parent, my friend, with they're kind of way over here? And it's like, you know what, it's not my circus. So yeah, but that mindful approach really makes a difference, I think. More than like we have to do exactly what Rabbi Barenblatt says. No, she has a point of view which can engender thought, but it's not asking for obedience. Bonnie.
So I'm not comfortable with this whole quote. I'm similar to what Marjorie said, but I don't see, for me, that holding back in order to please others is the same as holding back not to offend somebody. And she said it's variation on the same theme. I don't think so. I think that there are times that I don't want to offend someone. And that has nothing to do with trying to please them. I just don't want to offend them. I have, for whatever reason. And I don't think that's a character flaw. I think for me, having to shut my mouth, which is what I work on constantly. Thank you, Sue, for laughing. That it's something I work on a lot. And I was on a really lovely hike with a guy today that I don't know very well. And so I decided my job was to say more, tell me more. He didn't need my history. And one of the things he said was, you're a really good listener. Well, I don't hear that a lot. So I said, thank you, I'm working on that, which I think sort of was a thank you could have been enough. I didn't need to add, I'm working on it. But I am working on it, and I'm working on it. And a lot of it comes from here. And a lot of it comes from Al-Anon, where I learned the weight and think. So thank you. It's an interesting discussion.
Thank you, Bonnie. Roxanne.
Hi. I know you said we'd stop with Bonnie, but I thought, I wanted to speak up in the beginning, and I thought, well, I'm probably maybe being a little bit too humility if I don't say anything either. But I thought it was a really good point talking about pleasing people versus offending people. And I thought maybe it would be more helpful to think of it differently or reword it to say, like, instead of offending, to avoid conflict, because sometimes conflict can be productive. And it is uncomfortable. It is very uncomfortable to disagree and to hash that out. But if we're just being quiet to avoid conflict, that's kind of the same as being quiet in order to please people, to maintain the peace, to maintain order.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great distinction. Yeah, I think that's kind of, one way to kind of interpret what she's saying is like, okay, yeah, maybe it's about, yes, I'm not going to repeat what you say because you said it very well. Harry, I see your hand there.
I like what you said about it being situational. And one of the ways of, if you're not sure how to respond, you can always prefix your response with, would you like to hear my opinion? So that they're sort of braced for their whatever response you're going to give them. Versus sometimes you'll give a response, but they really didn't want your response.
Yeah. Or
they were just debating something. But so if you just prefix it as, that's very interesting. Would you like my opinion on it? And then I think that might be another approach. If you're unsure.
Thank you. Great way to use Paul's phrase, navigating the boundary. Okay, I see Sarah's hand and then Martin.
Well, it's interesting what you just said, Harry, because I wrote down on this paper, after somebody else was sharing, not speak, even if you have an opinion, and that's something that I feel like I have to practice, in the realm, know yourself if you're an introvert or an extrovert. And I definitely have to work on listening more. And it's good to not speak, even if you have an opinion, because sometimes people that are very quiet just don't speak and they do have an opinion. And if I am more quiet and give others an opportunity to talk, then there's more room for others in the room. So, I'm using this concept now in my relationships with people, because I'm looking at how I interact with others and interpersonal effectiveness.
Mhm. Thank you, Sarah. Great points. Martin. Martin, you're still on mute.
Sorry. Thanks, Greg. Can you hear me? Am I on?
Yep.
Yep. Yeah. As other people mentioned, it's situational. I think of it kind of like it's almost like a dance or a chess game, and just kind of pay attention how the wind is blowing, and just keep the music going, basically. So that's my analogy about how to handle each situation. Good.
Thank you. Keep the music going. I like it. Okay, so usually we're kind of doing like we did here with these sort of quotes and short discussion points. I'm going to veer a little bit into teaching for a couple minutes, and then we'll have a discussion around it, because Paul sent me something really interesting that I wanted to share with everyone. And this is from a website about Aristotle, where the Greek philosopher, he wrote a lot about virtue ethics, and he would say, here's this sphere of action, and if you have excess, there's the mean, which is the virtue, and the deficiency, which is the vice. And when my book first came out, I gave a talk over in Berkeley, and a friend of mine from high school is a philosophy professor at Berkeley, and he came by and he said, this is an awful lot like Aristotle's thing. And I was like, oh no, this is independent of Aristotle. But then in the following years, I got to think about it. I realized that Maimonides, the Jewish philosopher, was a place with this kind of middle way in Judaism. A lot of that traces back to Maimonides, and he read Aristotle. He read all the Greek philosophers, Aristotle and Plato, and a lot of his writing was actually trying to integrate sort of Greek philosophy with Jewish philosophy. So this is from his book, 8 Chapters, or sometimes known as 8 Chapters of the Rambam, which is a really interesting book. It's a commentary on Pirkei Avot, which is the ethics of the fathers, some very great aphorisms. And so here we have this pleasure and pain, which is temperance is the virtue, and lasciviousness and insensibility. And that seems an awful lot like temperance, which lies midway between indulgence and asceticism. So this may not be exactly the same thing, but it's clearly he has been influenced by Aristotle's discussion of virtue ethics, and Mussar is very much a virtue ethics, which means, rules-based ethics are, okay, we follow rules to tell us what's right or wrong, but virtue ethics is we're developing virtues, character traits within ourselves, which then guide us to right or wrong action, whatever the circumstance. Whereas a rule is very circumstance bound, and you got to make more and more rules to kind of cover more and more circumstances. So I thought this was pretty interesting. And then here is another piece, and this goes back to the sort of small actions. So here we have Maimonides writing that the Torah is teaching us things so that we learn to avoid extremes and to follow the correct path. So this is kind of a restatement of this idea about kind of finding the middle way. And then he says something really interesting, and I'm going to read the second one, and I'm going to ask someone else to read this third bullet. So to cure someone of extreme self-denial, or if someone is kind of at an extreme, and Maimonides was also, he was also a doctor. He was the doctor for the vizier of Egypt. So he uses this medical analogy, and he thought that like disease, he's talking about diseases of the soul. So if someone has a soul disease of extreme self-denial, we would order them to be extravagant towards themselves over and over again, many times over, until they have expunged their quality of stinginess, self-denial, and have become extravagant. Then we tell them to be merely generous towards themselves. So then Rabbi Yaakov Feldman, who did the translation of the 8 chapters of the Rambam and wrote commentary, can someone unmute and read kind of this third bullet, please?
Okay. We treat someone with an extreme disposition by taking them to the opposite extreme and by having them act that way again and again for a while. Then we would bring them back to the center.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and I will copy that last one into the chat. So from, maybe your past experience with Mussar, from reading my book, or from other seasons, I've always talked about taking these small actions. And I like that because small actions are easier to kind of implement. But here's kind of a different approach, and not even necessarily one that I'm recommending, but I think it's really interesting. And so what's this other approach that Maimonides is suggesting? Yeah, Sue.
It seems to me by taking the opposite approach, being the opposite, and then you can come back to the middle. Like if you're said something about, it says the opposite extreme. So you keep doing it and then you repeat it over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And then that gets you more to the middle because you've done something totally that you're not used to doing into the extreme, then you can come back to the middle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Joanne and then Martin.
Yeah, I don't know, this is just a little comment. There was a Seinfeld in which George decided he was going to do the opposite of what he usually does. And he did, and he had some success with it.
Thank you. Yeah, Seinfeld, great piece of Jewish literature for sure. Martin.
What's my screen?
Yes. Can someone explain it says stinginess and self-denial? What's self-denial and stinginess? How's that correlate?
So Bonnie, did you want to?
Yeah, I saw self-denial as lack of self-care. And so it's the same thing. You don't take care of yourself. You're stingy towards yourself.
Okay.
That's the way I read it.
I thought it was stinginess toward other people. That's what I was thought.
So it to me, it went along with what I would call self-care.
Okay, Greg, is that about right? It's stinginess toward yourself, not toward.
I agree with Bonnie's interpretation. Yeah.
Okay,
I think
great.
that's what he's talking about here.
Thank you for that. Thanks.
Joanne, did you have something to add?
Well, it was along the same line. I agree with Bonnie but I have a friend who happens to be in very good financial shape, but she drinks powdered skim milk at home. And then I had her over for latkes, and she sat in front of a bowl of mixed nuts, and they were very nice nuts, just like eating them and eating them. Finally, I took them away when she had almost finished the whole bowl. But, I just, it aggravated me, actually, I'll have to admit, because it's like she wouldn't buy herself these nuts, but she'll come to my house and eat the whole thing.
Mm.
And she's done this with other things, you know, like I bought a nice tea and she kept making, but because she wouldn't get herself the nice tea. But if I bought it, she'll, you know, just drink a. So finally I said, I want a cup of this tea also. So
Mm.
I took a tea bag. It just like, I don't know. So she's stingy with herself, and she can be like sort of blind to how she is to other people. But
Yeah.
that's her.
And you had to set a boundary.
Yeah, I had to.
Okay, so we aren't going to have a long time for breakout groups, but I do want us to get in them a little bit today because that's an important part of what we do. And for the great breakout group, I'm going to put in the chat a kind of list of possible actions that you could take.
Hmm.
So what I'd like you to do is kind of pick an action inspired by the list that you could do to bring your humility into balance. And then, you know, what action would you take? Are you going to do something small, or might you try something really bigger and dramatic? I would say please be as specific as possible about the time and place you're going to do this. Like, oh, I'm going to speak out more. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to speak out more in this over dinner with this person. I'm going to speak out less in this meeting with these at work with these 4 people. So, because that really helps make it kind of concrete. And remember that we're listening without judgment and without offering advice. So here in the chat is the list. These are from the end of the chapter, but these are things to just inspire you, to kind of help you think about this. And let me, let's see, where's the breakout rooms?
Mhm.
So we'll probably have only about 5 minutes in the room. So yeah, so there we go. Click accept, and we'll see you back here in a few minutes. And if you've been streaming, this is where we end the stream for the week. Thank you so much for being here. I want to invite you to come by the American Mussar webpage, or go by the American Mussar YouTube channel to see kind of past episodes of the Mussar Show. I kind of like that, the Mussar Show. Anyway, please tune back in, and thanks for being here. Here. And for those who are new, I do post these on the American Mussar YouTube channel, usually about a week later, if you ever miss one. So we have a couple minutes left. Would anyone care to kind of share their experience or a practice that you're choosing, or something you might want to focus on? And some of you may remember Finn, who's decided to come join us. Yes, Paul.
Yeah, so I was in a room with Sarah, and we both came to the same idea of self-care being really important. That it's something that seems to always slough off to the very last thing, that other things become more important. And even when I know that it's important, whatever they are, I was talking about physical things, and but doing a better job of staying on top of journaling or gratitude lists, things like that. When I do it, I feel wonderful, and then I think, okay, I can check that off my list, and it's not like a life list. I can check it off. If it's like it's maintenance. And anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Martin.
My father said one of his ideas for how to live a long life is listen to your body. So whenever I get a little unexpected ache and pain somewhere, I say, I wonder what's causing that. And it's usually if it's not a physical ailment from injuries for exercise, it's usually something emotional angst going on. And I've been experiencing that the last couple of months. Anyway, so it's a time to remind myself, okay, time for self-care. So I pay attention to the clues that tell me it's time for self-care.
Thank you. Thank you, Martin. Sue.
Another argument for self-care. I think a lot of us were really into that. And I tried to be specific. I mentioned bubble baths because I wanted to like try to figure out specifically and maybe even write it down during the day, you know, when am I going to do this? Because it, like everybody's saying, we think of ourselves a lot of times last, or we take care of all the stuff we need to take care of. So I kind of want to try to build a little bit of that into my day, or at least like 2 to 3 times a week, or just be specific of what I'm going to do and when.
I love that. Be specific, what and when. Anyone else care to kind of comment or share anything? Yes, Shelley.
Yeah, so I had the joy of being with Martin and Sue. So I'm so glad that they spoke up and talked about body talk and their own self need of having that lovely bath. I myself have been working on kind of generational imprints or traumas that we perceive as children, and how it tends to make us not have self-care because we tend to shrivel up but then being somebody like Martin, whenever I have an experience, I immediately go, whoa, where did this come from? You know, where did it originate? Let's remove it. And last night I spoke with my boys about generational trauma and, you know, what happens in the womb and what they now know about how we're imprinted till age 7 and just how my parents, what they went through to then for me and then for them. And, you know, just to say that the coping mechanisms that they maybe have been doing aren't the best, right? And that we can really truly look after ourselves to make ourselves happy. And so I was saying that one of the things I did today was like, I need a new room. I need to walk into my bedroom and feel like I'm in sunshine. And so totally got everything new as I'm in the process after is finishing my room. So again, self-care. I always say, look at your self-worth, do self-care.
I'm really liking this self-care theme. I could use a dose of that myself. It's been and actually I was supposed to meet with a Hevruta early in the morning. He's in Europe, and I woke up and I just texted him like, I'm sorry, I'm not feeling well. I got to go back to sleep, and slept for another hour and a half. And I really just made a huge difference in my day to do that. Janos, you will have the last word before we close. And you are unmute.
You notice in my work that people are easier motivated by fear than by love. So often when I'm not able to take care of myself, I'm motivated fearfully, while if I do say what I think, people will reject me, and on and on. So then I notice that I'm more kind of driven by fear, and that's not necessarily a good motivation. Sometimes we need to find that courage that will override the fear and teach us how to do better. Thank you.
Thank you. I love that. You know, there is no courage without fear, to quote, I'm blanking on the name of the movie, but yeah, that's a really important point. And that's a real great counterpoint. Thank you all. Thank you so much, everyone. We're going to close as we began with a very short meditation to close our sacred space. So once again, please relax in your seat and close your eyes. And take in a leisurely deep breath. And follow it by a nice leisurely exhale. And focus on the light filtering through your eyelids. This is the light of your divine spark. that common spark of humanity that we all share. Allow that to connect with your innermost being. Feel the love and warmth and support. And share that with the others in our community on this call today. And allow yourself to receive that warmth and love and support in return. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes.